1969, the artist Philip Guston provocatively painted himself wearing the KKK's white hood. In his signature pink studio, we see him smoking and painting a portrait similar to the one we're facing. The simple composition is lit by a light bulb and an open window, and contains art supplies, a clock, and, of course, the artist and his easel. I made a video about 4 years ago on Philip Guston's shoes and their link to the Holocaust, and in this video, I want to look more specifically at Philip Guston's depiction of members of the KKK and, more importantly, what it could all mean. Why do they look like inoffensive cartoons? Why are they often seen driving and smoking? And why did Guston paint himself wearing the white hood? Before we start the video, I just want to thank very, very quickly, not my patrons. Well, yeah, I do want to thank my patrons. Thank you for supporting the channel. It's amazing. And you can also support the channel on patreon.com/thecanvas. Anyway, that's not what I want to do. I want to thank people who, because I was at an anarchist workshop this weekend in Montreal, or last weekend by the time this video comes out. And a couple of people recognized me, which was super touching. And not only did they recognize me, but they came to talk to me. And we spoke and we hung out. It was amazing. And I'd like to thank these people and say hello. Hi. If we saw each other at the Rafale, which was the anarchist workshop weekend camp something, hello. Thank you for saying hi to me. It really made me feel like these videos do something, I guess. Philip Goldstein, that's his original name, was born in Montreal. That's where I was born, of Jewish Ukrainian refugees fleeing pogroms. He was still a child when his parents left for Southern California, hoping to find better job opportunities. In the 30s, at the age of 20, he made socially conscious paintings depicting, for example, the KKK. He didn't depict them in his iconic style yet, that would only come decades later, but the sensitivity had been there. Guston worked at the Stanley Rose bookshop in Hollywood, and it's in this bookstore that he'd organize his first exhibition that would greatly influence him. There was this one painting that the John Reed Club, a leftist association, commissioned him to do on the state of black people in America. He painted the Scottsboro Boys, a group of 9 teenagers accused of raping 2 white women in Alabama. I sadly can't show it to you, and I'll explain why soon. There was also the painting Conspirators, which presented Klansmen with the iconic enormous hands that will reappear 30 years later in his career. There's also, in the background, a black man being lynched next to Christ on the cross, making an obvious parallel, which the right obviously didn't appreciate. The reason I couldn't show you the first painting and that the second artwork is a drawing for Conspirators, not the actual painting, is because the Stanley Rose bookshop was raided by the LAPD's Red Squad, a right-wing division of the LAPD which cracked down on California's left wing. Klansmen were everywhere in American society. There were 8 million of them in America in the mid-20s. Assuming that most of them were men and that America's population was of 116 million people in 1925, which would mean that there were 58 million men, then it would mean that up to 14% of American men were Klansmen. As I said, they were everywhere, including in office and in America's police departments. So they raided Philip Goldstein's exhibition and destroyed his paintings. 2 years later, in 1935, Philip Goldstein moved to New York and changed his name to Philip Guston. Keep in mind, we often associate the KKK as being anti-black, which they absolutely were, but their hatred wasn't limited to black people. They were against leftists and other civil rights activists, of course, what we would call today wokes. They were also against queer people, Catholics, immigrants, and Jewish people. This made Philip Goldstein an obvious target for the KKK as a Jewish immigrant who, through his art, was standing up for social causes. But in New York, Philip Guston, with his newly changed name, also changed his art style. He was heavily influenced by abstract expressionists such as Jackson Pollock, who he went to high school with back in California. He became an abstract expressionist and gained fame and recognition as an abstract expressionist. It was only in the late 1960s that Guston went back, controversially, to figurative painting. Amidst the social upheaval of the period, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the second wave feminist movement, the student movement, the queer movement, the Native American rights movement, the counterculture in general, Guston, and I believe rightfully so, felt like it was inappropriate to paint abstractly. The war, what was happening to America, the brutality of the world. What kind of man am I, sitting at home, reading magazines, going into frustrated fury about everything, then going into my studio to adjust a red to a blue? This brings us to his figurative works and, for this video, his depiction of the KKK. Speaking of his images of the KKK more specifically, he said, "I was painting common objects and so on, and the Democratic Convention took place in 1968, and like everybody else, I was very disturbed about it. It seemed to connect with way back in the 30s when I was just beginning to paint. The Klan was very powerful in LA in those years." In one sentence, the 1968 Democratic Convention was very tense because the Democratic establishment was torn on the Vietnam War, while younger liberals and leftists were against it, which sparked protests and severe police repression. Things don't really change, do they? Anyway, I want to dive into these works by breaking down two elements which they often share in common. Let's start with bloodstains. Bloodstains are some of the only elements of overt violence in these paintings. They're either subtle, like in City Limits, or a bit more pronounced, like in Riding Around, or a central element to the work, like in this untitled 1969 work. In this one, you see a Klansman covered in blood splatters, the red contrasting with the white hood and background. The violence isn't only implied by the blood though, he's also holding up a whip. It isn't the only painting with a whip. In Bad Habits, a pair of blood-stained Klansmen seem to indulge in bad habits, noticeably alcohol, and the one on the right is holding up a whip. However, he's not using it as an instrument of repression. He seems to be whipping himself. In Remorse, we see another Klansman embarrassed, and though he's not whipping himself, his white hood turns red out of shame. Bloodstain and whips aren't the only elements gesturing to violence. In Edge of Town, Guston shows pieces of wood with nails sticking out of them. They might be coming back from doing some renovations, but chances are, and this is only implied, that they're using this piece of wood as a weapon. In Dawn, the wood planks return, but this time bloodied, with feet sticking out of the trunk of the Klansman's car. Violence here is depicted a bit more frontally, but not as frontally as in Bad Times. In it, Klansmen are driving their car, but this time they're holding a gun. It seems to depict a drive-by shooting. The victims' bodies are hidden by a curtain, and, a bit like in Dawn, only their legs and feet are sticking out. This violence is an extremely important theme in this series of paintings, as it's the very reason why Guston is making these works in the first place. However, although this series is, in part, about denouncing the racist violence of the KKK, which Guston had been a victim of decades before their production, this series seems to trivialize this violence. There's a nonchalance, a casualness to this racist American violence, which Guston is putting on display. This nonchalance is conveyed through cartoons. Guston depicts his Klansmen and other objects extremely cartoonishly. None of these Klansmen are scary or eerie, except perhaps this one, which is untitled and made between 1968 and 1969. Some characteristics of this painting are shared by his other paintings, the simple color palette and the dotted lines, but we rarely, if ever, see Guston's Klansmen look at us so intensely. Take Riding Around, for example, or City Limits. It shows 3 Klansmen in a tiny car. I've heard it being compared to a clown car to show how absurd it looks. They're kind of cute, riding together, compacted together. I can just imagine their legs touching. Even the cars in which they ride are comical with their asymmetrical tires, and they remain comical even if the subject matter is gruesome. There's also something adorable about the slits in their hoods, which look like naive, beady eyes and which add to the clumsiness and goofiness of their characters. The car and the cigarettes specifically, two elements that I noticed reappear often in this series, contribute to turn these paintings into casual scenes. The subjects are supposed to be hateful men, but they're also doing everyday things, driving, perhaps having a stroll with friends, and smoking cigarettes. They're just dudes smoking and driving. They could be your brother, neighbor, or friend. So these two elements, the violence represented by bloodstains and the casualness represented by cartoons, are kind of conflicting. Why would anyone want to represent this violence so nonchalantly? Why would anyone want to represent a white supremacist group in this way? To understand if Guston is trying to make the Klansmen likable, we need to ask ourselves why he painted them in the first place. Alright, so why did Philip Guston paint Klansmen? There are many reasons why he could have done it, and I'll point to some of those reasons, but Guston himself said, "They are self-portraits. I perceive myself as being behind the hood. The idea of evil fascinated me. I almost tried to imagine that I was living with the Klan. What would it be like to be evil?" The idea of it being a self-portrait is confirmed by Philip Guston's The Studio, perhaps the most popular of the series and the painting we opened the video with. He might be displaying some radical empathy by trying to put himself in the shoes of evil people, people who committed a hate crime and trashed his very first exhibition. But there could be another way in which this could be a self-portrait. Art historian Donald Cuspit links the artist wearing a hood to his Jewish identity. Guston's change of name, the way he repressed his Jewish identity to protect himself, was a response to traumatic circumstances and could have been something he was deeply ashamed of. There's something to be said about the hood not only symbolizing the violence of the KKK, but also the loss of identity which a hood, or a mask, can represent. The fact that the mask he's wearing is one which represents white supremacy, that he's changing his name to a white passing name, assimilating himself to the whiteness of America, could symbolize, to follow what Cuspit's saying, that Guston feels like he contributed to white supremacy in America by doing exactly what the KKK wanted him to do: erase his Jewish identity. However, to me, these Klansmen are most powerful not as Philip Guston's self-portrait, nor as symbols of self-suppression within a white supremacist framework, but as symbols for racism. It might be a bit vague and broad, so let me explain. I recently read the book White Fragility, which I was told not to read because it was written by a white woman who does anti-racist trainings for businesses, and there are other better anti-racist literature out there, which there are. But I read it anyway because someone else was reading it around me, and I wanted to see if I'd have the same criticisms as my friends, but in general, I think it was a pretty good introduction for your average white person who wants to learn more about racism in the 21st century. It was written by Robin DiAngelo, by the way. I didn't mention that, but yeah, here. That's your citation, I guess. I think one of the most important points of this book is to explain that racism isn't what most people think it is. Our understanding of what being racist is was heavily influenced by the civil rights movement. Here's a quote. "He's not a racist. He's a really nice guy." After the civil rights movement, to be a good moral person and to be complicit with racism became mutually exclusive. You could not be a good person and participate in racism. Only bad people were racist. To accomplish this adaptation, racism first needed to be reduced to simple, isolated, and extreme acts of prejudice. These acts must be intentional, malicious, and based on conscious dislike of someone because of race. Racists were those white people in the South, smiling and picnicking at the base of lynching trees. In other words, racists were mean, ignorant, old, uneducated Southern whites. Nice people, well-intentioned people, open-minded middle-class people, people raised in the enlightened North, could not be racist. But this view of what racism is reductive. Nowadays, nobody calls themselves racist. Even racist people don't call themselves racists. The confusion comes from associating racism as an indication of moral character rather than as the presence of biases and prejudices that come from our upbringing. Refusing to look at your biases and prejudices, which we all have, out of certainty that because I'm a good person, I see everyone as equal, fails to recognize how socialization affects the way we see others and how we treat others. The fact is, we all have biases and prejudices against some groups of people which will affect the way we treat them even if we don't want to. Let me give you an example that has nothing to do with race. Let's look at the Southern accent, or listen to the Southern accent. If you ask me if I treat people with a Southern accent differently than I do with others, I'd say I don't. I think they're just as likely to be kind, smart, open-hearted as everyone else in the world. I know very smart people with Southern accents. That's what I think, but by examining my biases and prejudices, I know that instinctively I have certain reflexes to think that they're idiots, that they're backwards. I'll assume that they're into driving pickup trucks in the dirt, etc. These things are ingrained in me, and I have to actively fight them to deconstruct them, and in order to do that, I need to recognize my biases first. So what D'Angelo says is that you can have biases, misogynistic, ableist, racist, or otherwise, and still be a good person. That's because everyone has biases, but not everyone is willing to be aware of them. So what does that have to do with Guston's Klansmen? They are racist, obviously. They're wearing the hood, but they're also casual, innocent, and quirky. They could be anyone. They're driving, smoking, chatting. They have friends, relationships they can love. The idea that people who are racist, who hold prejudices, are evil, always angry and full of hatred is simply not true, and it's reductive. Plenty of people hold prejudices without being angry and full of hatred. Plenty of people hold prejudices without even knowing they do. So when I see Guston's Klansmen, I don't see monsters. They're purposefully not represented as such. What I see is everyday people. I see my friends or people in my family, and I could even see myself. That's what Guston did, placing himself in the position of a Klansman, not to legitimize the Klan or make it look cool. They definitely don't look cool, but to represent our biases and prejudices that we carry with us as a result of our upbringing, and to represent how casual and mundane these biases can feel like when you grow up with them and are surrounded by them. Guston is taking this casualness and mundaneness and turns it against his audience. While the hoods hide the true identity of the Klansmen, Guston identifies a veil that covers not only the Klansmen, but all of society. By revealing the hoods, he's paradoxically unveiling our apparently post-racial society. And for a man who gave up abstract art to make paintings that fight power and denounces the state of the world, I feel like seeing Guston's Klansmen as a repudiation of the KKK would be reductive and would greatly diminish Guston's art. This isn't a KKK equals bad painting. That wouldn't be confronting. Guston did more than that. If to be considered racist, you need to wear a hood, then a lot of people wear hoods and they're just not willing to admit it. And these paintings confront us by holding up a mirror and showing us exactly that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I don't know what to say this time. Still look up my Letterboxd. For all of you who still watch, there were so many comments about you watching to the end and watching my outro. I guess because of those comments, a lot of people decide to watch the outro of my last video, I guess. I don't know. So still comment if you watch these outros, I guess. Hey, as I said earlier, I was at a anarchist workshop weekend, which was absolutely amazing. I went to other protests as well. I may or may not have been to a protest about trans vengeance, which turned out really bad. Amazing people that I've met. I want to say hi to people again. Hello to the people I've met and who recognized me and who spoke to me. That was really, really cool. I really enjoyed that. And yeah, Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to the patrons, of course, Roman Brandel, X Towns, and Jeff, and all the other patrons who support the channel. Extremely, extremely, extremely appreciated. If you want to support the channel, you can check out patreon.com/canvas. Yeah, thank you. Gratitude to all of you. I skipped a week because I was at that anarchist workshop thing and at these protests for trans people. So I hope I'm pardonné. I don't know what that is in English. I hope you forgive me for skipping out on 1 week of Canada's videos. I hope you survived it. Anyway. All right. Thank you. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. It won't be a video on fascism. Turns out it's a bigger project than I thought. I'm still working on it, but I'll probably make a video on women. Can you imagine it? It's going to be a good video. I hope so. I'm reading a text and I want to like break down that text, and yeah, it's really interesting. Anyway, thank you. All right, goodbye. I'm not giving you the chair this time, so you're just going to have to leave, or the video's going to cut. It's going to cut now.